Thanks for joining us on the program today. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Here's what's coming up on the world today. Planned talks between U.S. and Russian officials underway in Saudi Arabia. Israel claims to have killed a senior Hamas leader and aide during airstrikes on Sunday. Plus, South Africa's ambassador to the United States, Ibrahim Rasool, returns home after being expelled. Let's begin the world today. Talks between the U.S. and Russian officials on a possible peace deal in Ukraine are still underway at a Ritz-Carlton hotel in Saudi Arabia. It comes a day after U.S. officials met with Ukrainian officials, also in Saudi Arabia. Ukraine's defense minister says those discussions were productive. In the meantime, fighting continues in Ukraine, where Russia launched an offensive 3 years ago. Ukrainian forces say in the past day there have been 140 clashes, including airstrikes, 74 airstrikes on Ukrainian units and settlements. Acting Mayor Artem Kobzer says at least 28 people, including 4 children, have been injured in the Russian missile attack on Sumy. The attack, according to him, targeted residential areas and infrastructure, including children's hospitals. In another development, Russian President Vladimir Putin has held a telephone conversation with the United Arab Emirates counterpart, Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, in which the Russian president thanked him for mediation in prisoner exchanges with Ukraine. They also discussed Russian-American talks on Ukraine. As for the Ukrainian delegation, they're still in Saudi Arabia to hold further talks with the U.S. Former Ukrainian parliamentary member Serhiy Lyshenko says they remain in Saudi to continue conversations with the U.S. He said such negotiations do not last just one day and can go on for months. Lyshenko also says the talks with the U.S. are about infrastructure and shipping safety and a mutual ceasefire. Asked whether any results from the talks could be expected by Easter, that's April 20, he says it's a good symbol, but in the realities of war, it may not necessarily work. The Turkish government says the 1,133 people have been arrested in 5 days of protests across the country. It says people have been abusing the right to protest and warns that terrorizing the streets will not be tolerated. Protests began when Istanbul's Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu, an opponent of President Erdogan, was detained on Wednesday on corruption charges. İmamoğlu says the charges are politically motivated. This is something Erdogan denies. Turkey's presidential election is not scheduled until 2028. İmamoğlu was on Monday confirmed as his party's candidate after a symbolic primary vote. April 28th is the date set aside for Canada's new Prime Minister, for snap elections. Mark Carney says he is calling the election just 9 days into office because of the need to act in light of Trump's policies and threat. He wants to consolidate and legitimize his position as Canada's leader. He told Canadians on Sunday, "We are facing the most significant crisis of our lifetimes because of President Trump's unjustified trade actions and his threat to our sovereignty. That's why I'm asking for a strong positive mandate from my fellow Canadians. I've just requested that the Governor-General dissolve Parliament and call an election for April 28th, and she has agreed." Under Canadian election rules, federal campaign periods must be at least 37 days long, but no more than 51 days. With Carney triggering the vote on Sunday, an election day set for April 28th, this year's campaign will be the shortest allowable by law. Canada has 343 federal electoral districts, which are known as ridings. Eligible voters can cast a ballot for their preferred candidate in the riding in which they reside. The country has a first-past-the-post election system, which means that the candidate who secures the most votes in the riding wins, even if they do not win a majority of the votes. Under Canada's parliamentary system, the party that wins the most seats in the House of Commons will typically be asked to form a government. If a party gets the most seats but not enough for an outright majority, It seeks to form an agreement with another party or parties to be able to pass legislation. The leader of the single largest party also becomes prime minister. Canadians do not vote directly for prime minister. I want to bring in now international affairs analyst Dr. Charles Chukwunaru. He is in Alberta, Canada. Dr. Chukwunaru, thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you, Amarachi. Thank you for having me again.
And I suppose you will be voting in the upcoming elections on April 28th. The elections this time are mainly about standing up to America. Well, that's what the candidates say it will be all about. For Canadians, will this election be much more than about those U.S. trade tariffs?
Yeah, you're right, Amarachi. The election this time, unlike previous elections, is going to be focused on foreign policy or what is happening coming in from outside Canada, unlike in the past when the emphasis has been on the economy. So you're right. So it's going to be about which of the leading candidates can deal with the threat from America's Donald Trump.
So isn't it interesting that most domestic problems like housing, employment, transportation, even migration seem to have taken a back seat now in light of the looming U.S. trade tariffs? Do you think the candidates, whichever one of them gets to be prime minister, would be distracted by what's going on with foreign policy to focus on domestic issues?
Well, foreign policy should be a product of domestic policy. So ideally, foreign policy is conditioned and influenced by domestic policy. But in Canada, Canadians are in a unique position this time around. This time around, unlike in the past, what happens from outside Canada, especially the United States, can make or mar what happens inside Canada. So if the threat coming from Donald Trump, I want to say Donald Trump advisedly instead of the US, Canada is not, I want to put it on record, that Canada is not at war or soft war or tariff war with the US. It is Canada versus Donald Trump, because majority of Americans are in support of Canada and they don't like what Donald Trump is doing. Anyway, having said that, so back to your question, if the threat coming from Donald Trump, the threat of annexation, in addition to the tariff threat, if Donald Trump has his way, there may not be any economy. There may not even be any Canada to start with. It is a known fact. It's been proven, that the tariff war, it's a pretext to break the Canadian economy and force the Canadians to beg America to annex them as the 51st states of the United States of America. So the emphasis on the election is rightly on who can deal with Donald Trump. Otherwise, there might not even be any Canada to talk about employment, unemployment, cost of living, and all that. So you must have a country first before you start talking about the economy. And Donald Trump is an existential threat to Canada. So the election is all about dealing with the existential threat coming from Donald Trump.
Right. Now let's talk about Mark Carney, the former governor of the Central Bank of England, who is now prime minister. He does not have any political experience. He had none before he was, should I say, selected as prime minister. Some have criticized him for towing the same line as his Liberal Party president, Justin Trudeau, and that he does not offer any real change. Do you think his lack of political pedigree could harm his chances in this election? Is he being overly ambitious by calling an election too soon?
Well, I really commend him. I was taken by surprise. He has called for election within 9 days into office. And that showcases Canadians' democracy as one of the best anywhere in the world. I was expecting that the election will hold sometime in August, but considering the fact that he will be the first prime minister, as in my opinion, or not in my opinion, as check the history, this will be the first prime minister that will be forming government unelected. He is not a member of parliament. He wasn't elected by anybody. He has never run for election anywhere. And then he is forming the government in Canada as a prime minister, unelected. So parliament is supposed to resume this week and is calling for election because he doesn't want to sit in the parliament unelected. So that is really commendable. I wonder if that could happen in developing countries like Nigeria, where leaders want to sit tight. And if he was the ordinary leader in developing countries, he would look for reasons to keep postponing the election to remain in power, especially when his party was not doing well in the polls before he took over. Prior to his forming the government as prime minister, following the resignation of Justin Trudeau, the Liberal Party was almost, let me not say dead, they were losing at the polls. The Conservatives were by far ahead of the Liberals in the polls. And then he became prime minister. And then he's calling for election when he's not sure that he will win. Because if he doesn't win the election, he will go down in history as the shortest prime minister in the history of Canada. In fact, he will beat Charles Trooper's record of 69 days as prime minister in, I think, 1896? Yeah, 1896. He was prime minister for just, Charles was prime minister for just 69 days. And if if McCartney loses the election, he will go down in history as the shortest prime minister because he would have been in office for just 46 days. So he had the guts to call for election at this time when he could have shifted the date to show up his political base and his support. So that speaks to someone that is confident. That speaks to a man that is sure of himself. That speaks to a man that wants the mandate of his people. And then when you look at his pedigree, he is a man of first. He will be the first in history to be the governor of central bank of 2 G7 countries. Recall, he was the governor of the Canadian Central Bank during the financial crisis in 2008, caused by, and let me not even go into the cause, but he was able to navigate the challenges of the time and then reposition the Canadian economy and brought them into new prosperity. And then in England, when England had serious economic uncertainties following Brexit, they appealed for his help. He moved from Canada to England, where he became the governor of the Central Bank of England for 7 years. And through this difficult period, he was able to manage the monetary policies of England during the Brexit and then even at the beginning of the COVID era. So he was able to manage the British economy effectively. He has served in the United Nations climate policy as chair. He has been in the private sector. He has been chair of one of the biggest asset holding companies, especially in real estate. That's Brookfield. So he has been in the private sector. He has been in the government. Then coming to your question, whether he has the political pedigree, having not run election. Recall he was former deputy Minister of Finance at some point, and then he's been in government. So what he lacks in electioneering, or going to canvass for votes or running for political office, he will make that up because he easily stands out among his opponents, because he's not only does he have a doctorate degree in economy, his international exposure is such that Donald Trump will surely respect him.
I'd like to get to the other candidates in this election, if you don't mind. There's also the NDP leader, Jagmeet Singh, Bloc Québécois leader, Yves-François Blanchet, and Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. They're originally from Poilievre is from where you are, Alberta. He has been in politics for about 20 years now. Would his confrontational style of politics, many have said that, you know, he has this Trump style of politics. I mean, he likes to speak his mind, just like the U.S. president does. So they would match energy for energy if he became prime minister.
Well, that's what they say. But when he was asked how he's going to respond to Donald Trump if he becomes prime minister, he said he was going to be firm and respectful and firm. He tried to play a balancing game because the conservatives are traditionally political allies to the Republicans in the US because they share the same right-wing ideology. So ordinarily, the Republican Party president in White House would support the conservative candidate in Canada. But this time around, because of the threat, the existential threat posed by Donald Trump and his Republican Party to Canada, there has been a dramatic change in the polls since Donald Trump came into power and started threatening Canada. Prior to that, prior to Donald Trump being sworn in, the conservatives were doing well. It was expected that the Republicans would support the conservatives, but they started going down in the polls. In fact, the polls released late last week shows that the Liberals have upturned the poll, the ratings. The last poll shows that the Liberals now stand at 42%, and then the rating of the Conservatives now stands at 37%, and that is all thanks to Donald Trump.
Right.
So Donald Trump last week tried to make up for what is going on. I believe that he tried to help the conservatives because he said, oh, when he was asked about the Canadian election, you know, he's so meddlesome. He said, that he would prefer to deal with the Liberals instead of dealing with the conservatives because the conservatives are his traditional allies. And he said, but the conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, it's so, in his own words, that he's stupid and that he said some negative things about him, Donald Trump. Therefore, he wasn't looking forward to working with him, that he would prefer the McCartney. So some of us saw it as a belated attempt to turn the tide in favor of the Conservative Party, but Canadians are not buying it.
Right. So let's talk about the French-speaking provinces, and there's one candidate that stands out there. I mentioned him before, Yves-François Blanchet. What do the provinces have to offer Canada? From what I've been reading, they really haven't done well in polls in Canada historically.
Yeah, the Quebec bloc, it's not a party that really has the intention of forming, genuine intention of forming government at the center. It's pro Quebec independence. It's only campaigns within the Quebec province, and they've been they've been experiencing a lot of ups and downs. They've been sharing their votes with the Liberals and the NDP, because both the Quebec Bloc Party, the Liberals, and the NDP share the same left-wing ideology. So it's been a flip-flop. But right now, they have the momentum going because of what is happening in between the United States of America, of Donald Trump, and Canada. So they will surely take away some votes from the conservatives. So it's going to be a straight fight for votes between the liberals, the conservatives, and the Quebec Bloc Party.
What
And
is
of course, you also have the Green Party. The
right?
Green Party is there as well. It is also not a party that genuinely has believes it can win and form government. It talks about climate and all that to bring out policies that are environment friendly. And then, well, it's not an official national party because you need to attend a certain number of seats to become an official national party. Right now, the three official national parties are the Liberals, the Conservatives, and of course the Quebec Bloc.
But the NDP, I really wanted to know what their position has been in this U.S. trade tariff war with Canada. Their leader, Jagmeet Singh, well, he's been focused on worker and labor issues. Do they have any dog in the fight with the U.S. trade tariff wars?
Well, like I said earlier, they share the same ideology, left-wing ideology with the Liberal Party. And then, of course, in the last election, they helped the Liberal Party to form a minority government with their 24 seats. They added to 151 seats that the Liberals got in their last election in 2021 to form a minority government. So they are usually on the same side with the Liberals. In fact, that is why they are not expected to present a strong showing in the forthcoming election because they fish from the same pond with the Liberal Party. Their policies are similar to that of the Liberal, and then their view of foreign affairs, especially in dealing with Donald Trump, is in alignment with that of the Liberal Party. So the alliance with the Liberal Party might be their greatest undoing in the upcoming election, because most of their voters may as well vote for the Liberal Party because of the strong candidacy of Malkani.
Dr. Charles Chukwunaro, thank you so much for speaking with us on The World Today.
Always a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
We're off on a short break now on the program. When we return, UNESCO World Heritage Site and important tourist destination in Mexico City faces environmental crisis. That and other stories. Stay with us. Welcome back. Hamas says an Israeli airstrike on a hospital in Gaza has killed a senior Hamas leader and an aide on Sunday evening. Ismail Baroum, the head of the group's financial affairs, was killed in the strike on Nasser Hospital, the main medical facility in Khan Yunis. Officials say he was receiving treatment at the hospital after being wounded in an airstrike 4 days ago. Israel's military said it struck a key Hamas member operating inside the hospital compound following an extensive intelligence gathering process, and said that precise munitions had been used to mitigate harm. The Hamas-run ministry said many others, including medical personnel, were injured. At least 51 Palestinians have been killed throughout the day in the besieged Gaza Strip, according to medical sources. Fatalities likely to rise as incessant attacks continue in the north and south of the enclave. Now, over the last few days, Israel has intensified its war on Hamas in Gaza. The renewal of the bombardment has been condemned by rights and pro-Palestinian groups around the world. Germany saying the civilian deaths in Gaza are extremely worrying. The Foreign Ministry says it's now very clear they must return to negotiations and to the ceasefire that was in place. The war on Hamas was triggered by the Hamas attack on Israel on October 7, 2023, in which about 1,200 people, mainly civilians, were killed and 251 others taken hostage. Since then, Israel has launched an unrelenting war on the Hamas militant group, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowing to extinguish members of the group even to the last. Off and on, Israel has carried out its promise on the enclave. The militants are believed to be carrying out their operations from Gaza, punctuated by ceasefires and warnings of evacuations. This happened as Israel resumed its offensive in Gaza on March 18, 58 days after a ceasefire agreement with Hamas took effect. On Sunday, the Israel Defense Forces released this footage, reportedly documenting a military operation in the Tal al-Sultan area of southern Gaza's Rafah. Soldiers were seen patrolling dirt roads, accompanied by security dogs. The IDF claimed that its forces had encircled the area over the past hour as part of an operation aimed at dismantling terrorist infrastructure and eliminating armed elements. On the same Sunday, dozens of bodies arrived at Nasser Hospital in southern Gaza's Khan Yunis, following a fresh wave of alleged Israeli airstrikes. One local woman wailed, "What did they do to them? What did a child like this do to them?" Palestinian news media reports that dozens of citizens were martyred and injured in the ongoing Israeli bombardment since the early hours of Sunday on the Rafah and Khan Yunis districts in southern Gaza. Following the collapse of the latest ceasefire agreement, the Israeli Hostages Families Forum issued a statement on Thursday accusing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his government of ignoring the hostages and putting their lives at risk. But the Prime Minister and the Defense Minister have ordered the Israeli military to take stringent measures against Hamas in the Gaza Strip, blaming the Palestinian group's refusal to release the hostages. The European Union's High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Kaja Kallas, reaffirmed on Sunday the EU's firm stance against Hamas's involvement in the future governance of Gaza, pointing out that the Arab plan lacks a concrete terms to this issue. Speaking at the Arab Islamic Ministerial Committee meeting in Cairo, Kallas pointed out that the Arab initiative regarding Gaza's governance lacks concrete terms on addressing this critical issue.
The breakdown of ceasefire has caused appalling loss of life. This morning, I also met the families of the hostages, and always, listening to the stories is very, very hard. I again condemn strongly Hamas violence. The EU stands in solidarity with Israel and its people following the horrible attacks on the 7th of October 2023. And I reiterate now what I said this morning. Resuming negotiations is the only feasible way to end the suffering on all sides. Violence feeds more violence. What we are witnessing now is a dangerous escalation. It is causing unbearable uncertainty for the hostages and their families, and it is likewise causing horror and death for the Palestinian people. Israel has the right of self-defense against terror attacks, whether from Hamas, the Houthis or Hezbollah. However, military actions must be proportionate. And Israeli strikes into Syria and Lebanon risk further escalation.
Israel has been operating against the Hamas terrorist state in Gaza. Israel agreed to U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff's proposals to extend the temporary ceasefire. But Hamas twice rejected them. They are still holding in cruel captivity 59 of our citizens as hostages. They left us no choice. The war can end tomorrow with releasing our hostages, the demilitarization of Gaza, and the withdrawal of the armed Hamas and Islamic Jihad forces from there.
Crowds of Gaza residents on Sunday queued for flower bags outside an UNRWA-affiliated center as the UN warned the blockade of humanitarian deliveries pushed Gaza closer to an acute hunger crisis. The people complain of the possibility of experiencing a famine, something many have seen previously. The UN agency in Gaza says that while it distributes flour in Gaza, the main need is for water. On Sunday, the agency's chief, Philippe Lazzarini, warned of a shortage of humanitarian goods in Gaza, accusing Israel of blocking supplies for weeks. The death toll in Gaza has risen to 673, with an additional 1,233 injured since the resumption of military operations, according to the Palestinian Ministry of Health in Gaza. Meanwhile, demonstrators took to the streets of Amsterdam on Sunday in solidarity with Palestine following the recent resumption of fighting in Gaza. The demonstrators also hit out at U.S. President Donald Trump over his remarks about the relocation of Gaza residents. Protesters also denounced Western support for Israel despite large-scale pro-Palestinian protests around the world.
I think if there is really what they call it in the world, international court in the world, they should make something about it, because such kind of a crazy man, and he's in powerful place around the world, he will destroy the world. Like what he think, he want to take what they call it, he want to remove the people of Gaza, 2.5 million people, to remove them to some places, you don't know. And how is that possible? How does he think about such kind of idea? If someone normally don't think like that. We see all the people around the world, even in the United States, even in America, in Washington, and everywhere, and in Holland, in Great Britain, in France, all around the world. You see how many million people will go demonstration against such kind of things. And still most of the government of European government, they are supporting Israel. How is possible?
I believe that these protests are making a difference in changing public opinion, and also for us to make sure to put Palestine everywhere in everybody's face, to always remember that there's an ongoing genocide, regardless if it stopped or it didn't. There's a continuous struggle, and we should always have Palestine on the map, in the streets, and also it does affect the governments, whether it's positive or negative. We are shaking up and we're stirring up the system, the people.
Greenland's politicians have condemned plans for high-profile U.S. visits in the wake of President Donald Trump's threats to take over the island. Second Lady Usha Vance will make a cordial visit this week, and a separate trip is expected from Trump's national security advisor, Mike Waltz. Outgoing Greenlandic Prime Minister Mute Igede described the plan as aggressive and said the duo had not been invited for meetings. Meanwhile, the island's likely next leader accused the U.S. of showing a lack of respect. Greenland, the world's biggest island situated between the Arctic and Atlantic Oceans, has been controlled by Denmark, nearly 3,000 kilometers away, for about 300 years. It governs its own domestic affairs, but decisions on foreign and defense policy are made in Copenhagen. The U.S. has long held a security interest and has had a military base on the island since World War II. It's also thought that Trump is interested in the island's rare earth minerals. His son, Donald Trump Jr., visited Greenland before Trump's inauguration in January. He may have been expelled in the United States, but to many in South Africa, Ambassador Ibrahim Rasool is a hero. Going by the welcome he was given at the airport upon his arrival, Ambassador Rasool made his way through a huddle of journalists before being greeted by hundreds of flag-waving supporters clad in matching yellow T-shirts. He told the crowd he was no longer welcome to the United States.
And we must reset the relationship with America, because our relationship with America over 50 years has not always been with the White House. It has sometimes been with Congress, and it has always been with the people of the United States of America. A declaration of persona non grata is meant to humiliate you. But when you return to a crowd like this and with warmth and a sense of Ubuntu like this, then I will wear my persona non grata as a badge of dignity, and a badge that we have done the right thing.
Staying in the U.S., President Donald Trump last week issued an executive order that calls for closing the 46-year-old U.S. Department of Education. The president needs congressional approval, however, to shut the department. The order, however, directs Education Secretary Linda McMahon to take all necessary steps to facilitate the closure of the Department of Education and return authority over education to the states and local communities, while ensuring the effective and uninterrupted delivery of services, programs, and benefits on which Americans rely. At the signing, Trump said federal Pell Grants, a common type of federal undergraduate financial aid, Title I funding and resources and funding for children with disabilities would be preserved in full and redistributed to various other agencies and departments. The move still promises to upend the key functions the department performs in the broader education system, which include oversight of the federal student loan portfolio, civil rights enforcement in schools, and the distribution of billions of dollars to help impoverished, disabled students.
In a few moments, I will sign an executive order to begin eliminating the federal department.
Our correspondent in Washington, Maria Bird, joins us now. Maria, we knew the president was planning to cut the funding for education department, but completely dismantling it, what does that mean in actual terms?
You know, this is something that is unprecedented. We've never seen this type of executive order to close down an executive branch, a federal branch of government. When you talk about the Department of Ed and its structure and what it was designed to do, it was designed as oversight for the country's education system to ensure equity across the board for states. And so we know that history tells us that we have seen inadequate and equity challenges as far as education goes, depending on the state state that one lives in. And so that was really the focal point for why we have this federal system. And as you mentioned, federal student loan, which is a huge part of our higher education system, due to the exorbitant costs oftentimes for higher ed in the United States. It is required that many individuals are able to access student loans to be able to attend college and graduate school and to receive a higher level of education. So this is something that I think many are very concerned about. It's one that has definitely shaken many across the country. And education is such a pivotal part of the United States and such a pivotal part of the American dream. And so looking at how this could have a dramatic impact on the change of access to education, I think is one of the major concerns, is the access for all people to education in the United States.
Let's talk about how this trickles down to everyone else. I'm reading the states, parents and communities will now be empowered. Does that mean that they get to determine the curriculum at school and what children study?
Yeah, so if we look at kind of the structure of the Republican and Democratic parties, Republicans traditionally push more power to the states, give the states more authority. That is a very traditional Republican principle, and we've seen that history has shown us that. The challenge, I think, here where people are not quite sure of how this will operate is the lack of oversight, a national oversight. And so the states will now, as you mentioned, have responsibility for curriculum. So we could see some states putting forth what might be considered very rigorous academic structures and curriculums, and to choose a varied way of educating their students, while other states could be using more traditional methods. And so we could see inequity as far as scholastic attainment from individuals, and obviously parents' concern around the ability for their students to be able to have potential success long term, depending on the structure and the curriculum and the standards that are being put in place. The standards are going to be one of the greatest concerns, because who is going to be providing oversight for the standardization of academic achievement?
Now that DEI has been scrapped, there is a danger that a certain demographic might be denied admissions into schools. So how will this also trickle down to those who are multiracial and the sort of curriculum that they can study in school?
Yes, as we know, DEI is definitely something that has been a focal point most recently. And there has been, this predates even this current administration, there have been laws and obviously court cases put in place to try to remove some of these DEI or even affirmative action focused admission policies. And so where we are now, I think, is really kind of an overarching, a federally view of DEI and looking at it in a different direction, and not looking at, not allowing diversity, equity, inclusion to be a part of the application process for many colleges. Obviously, we also know there are colleges that's part of their principles, that's part of what they stand on. And so they are obviously combating some of that, are looking to do different than the direction of the federal government. So we're going to definitely see a change, I think, with the dismantling or change of the Department of Education federally, the removal of some of the DEI practices as far as admissions goes within the United States. One of the things that has not been addressed is some of the equity that exists around access. This could be access to resources, and that's really where some of these DEI measures have been put in place, affirmative action put in place, because of the playing field oftentimes is unlevel depending on the access to resources by youth or those who are looking to attain further education. So that yet has to be tackled, but that will probably be a next step in the process as we begin to see the numbers potentially of minority groups reducing in these areas. And we also know that minority in the United States is really changing rapidly because we're seeing many minority groups becoming larger pools of the population.
Maria, how should international students understand the changes that are about to take place?
International students it's a little different in that respect, because students will still have access as long as they're able to receive their visas for education. They should still have the ability to apply and for universities, because universities oftentimes look for a wide spectrum of student population. So it should have a less of an impact because they really don't fall underneath that affirmative action component or DEI components. They're really about bringing in a vast types of students into the institution.
Thanks again.
The only challenge could be if the visa laws change.
Right, and that's with all of Trump's efforts at clamping down immigration, that might be a challenge in the near future. Thanks again, Maria, for doing the explaining on this one. Well, firefighters continue to battle the wildfire in Yusong County for a third day after massive blazes erupted across South and North Gyeongsang provinces on Friday afternoon. This is in South Korea. So far, it's resulted in at least 4 deaths and 9 injuries, leading the government to declare a state of emergency in the southeastern regions of the country. Earlier today, forests were still engulfed in flames, thick smoke billowing into the sky as fire engines raced down the roads and firefighters pushed deep into the burning woods. According to the Korea Meteorological Administration, firefighting efforts remain challenging, with strong winds up to 15 meters per second nationwide and gusts hitting 20 meters per second in mountainous areas, coupled with dry weather fueling the flames. This is where we take our second break on the program. When we return, you're never too old to do what you love. At least just ask these 108-year-old woman in Japan who's still in the barbing game, giving cuts and even facials. Stay with us. Welcome back to the world today. The Chinampa area of Xochimilco, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, an important tourist destination in Mexico City, is facing an environmental crisis due to the high level of water pollution in its canals. A footage shows waste, including plastic bottles, floating in the canals that border the Chinampas. A problem here is that the worst Xochimilco's San Gregorio and reportedly extends throughout the 185-kilometer of waterways in the area. Locals say the government has failed to address their concerns, damaging the local environment and hampering farming and tourism. Studies have revealed that people in the Chinampa area are suffering from skin problems caused by the discharge of fecal matter and chemical waste into the canals. Locals say they become sick since the situation deteriorated. Ghana-Morocco have agreed to take steps towards waiving visa requirements for all travelers traveling between the two countries, a move aimed at strengthening diplomatic and economic ties. Ghana's Foreign Affairs Minister Samuel Uketso Ablakwa announced that the agreement will be submitted in both parliaments for ratification in the coming weeks. The two nations also committed to expanding cooperation in agribusiness, tourism, security, following discussions between Ablakwa and Morocco's ambassador to Ghana, Iman Kwadil. Addressing recent social media claims about violence against Africans in Morocco, Ablakwa said the ambassador refuted the reports that 700 Africans had been killed, clarifying that the widely circulated video was from June 2022, a border incident that resulted in 23 fatalities. He assured that no Ghanaian casualties were recorded. As part of strengthening ties, Morocco has also doubled its annual scholarships for Ghanaian students, increasing the number from 90 to 180. Now, learning another language at any age is said to be easy, depending on your commitment. A commitment to expanding one's understanding of other cultures and societies. That's what the French Language Day preaches, as it celebrates French with half of the world's speakers in Africa. Diplomats at the event held at the Alliance Française in Lagos advocate its benefit to diplomacy.
Bonjour, ça va? Comment allez-vous? Just a few common phrases in French that could lead to a whole new world of learning about the people who speak the language, their way of life, and how they relate with their neighbors. For years, Les Francophonie, French speakers, have been celebrating the language, especially in Africa, said to be home to half the population of French speakers in the world.
And we have a surprise for you because we just organized...
Recently in Lagos, a section of diplomats, officials, schools, and just people interested in the language gathered to celebrate once more.
Create, innovate.
The French and Canadian consuls general highlight the importance of learning the language.
French is no longer just a means of communication, but a language of cooperation, mobilization, and concrete action to change the world. And this conviction is at the heart of the theme chosen of the for the Francophonie celebration in Nigeria this year, 25.
As someone who currently speaks a few languages, I can say that knowledge of languages is a real opening to the world, one that allows us better to understand each other, our cultures, and our perspectives.
They later speak on current efforts made in their relations with Nigeria.
Today, climate change, biodiversity, loss, pollution threaten our planet. But through collective action, we can make a difference. The organization, the Francophonie organization, has already shown its commitment by launching different initiatives. But probably the most important one is the Institute for Sustainable Development, which helps countries or members to develop green policies and transition to sustainable energy.
For our part, Canada is strongly committed to taking action to address climate change here in Nigeria, in Africa, and around the world. And as part of our new Africa strategy, and moments ago I was talking about that, how just in the last week we've launched a new ambitious strategy for the continent, we were pleased to recently announce $5 million in new funding to support rural women in Nigeria.
To crown the celebration, awards are given to school children and students of Alliance Française who have participated in various competitions. Amarachi Ubani, Channels Television News.
As we end the program, a 108-year-old woman from the town of Tochigi has broken the record for the world's oldest female barber. This footage captured on Wednesday shows Shitsui Hakoishi cutting a customer's hair and giving them facial care afterwards. She says she's left on her own. She can earn, feed her children, and educate them if they want to go to school. That's why she picked the job. The centenarian began her career in 1936 after receiving her license and soon opened a business with her late husband. She's been working as a barber for almost 9 decades. On March 5, 2025, Guinness World Records officially verified Hakoishi as the oldest female barber at 108 years and 115 days old. Anthony Mancinelli from the United States was declared the world's oldest barber in 2018 at 107 years old, but he passed away a year later, leaving Hakoishi as the oldest living hairdresser. She looks nothing like her age. Thanks for watching The World Today. I am Amarachi Ubani.